Welcome to episode 40 of New Indian Woman podcast, airing first in late April 2021, and I'm your host Krishna. In today's episode, we are going to focus on a topic that you would all find interesting. This is on device usage. By this, we mean smartphones, tabs, computers, gaming devices, and even TV usage. This has been a concern for quite some time. How much of device usage is required as a necessary tool versus using it for entertainment, and especially for children? And this has been debatable always. But with the pandemic, this became a necessity. I will not get into the various ways in which it has helped us. We all know about it. This episode is planned roughly around the time when some kind of vacation is likely to happen for children across all ages. And that brings us to the question of what do we do about device usage by our children? There may be some classes here and there. Most of them have access to devices, and they are going to continue to have access to these devices. So what should be our approach towards this? Is this a concern area? Or is it okay to let the children be? Or does the answer change depending on the age group of the children? Let us explore these questions and more with Aruna Sankaranarayanan. Aruna is the guest for today. She is an author and psychologist. She writes for leading newspapers and magazines including The Hindu, Deccan Herald and Financial Express on relationships, work and well-being, and blogs at www.arunasankaranarayanan.com. I will share the details in the show notes as well. She was the founder and director of Prayatna, a center for children with learning difficulties, for 22 years. Her first book, Zero Limits, Things Every 20-something Should Know, which will be published by Rupa Publications shortly, includes a chapter on the responsible use of digital technology. We could not have asked for a better guest for today. Welcome, Aruna, to this episode of New Indian Woman.
Thank you, Krishna. I am delighted to be on your show.
So let us start, Aruna. I have a lot of questions, and I hope at the end of this episode, even listeners, if they have questions, we will give the links where they can write to us. And if there are any questions that need to get answered later, we will try for that as well. Because this is a topic of discussion. Of late, any two people meet, they talk about device usage amongst children. So I thought this would be apt. Most of the articles, as a layperson, when I try to look for articles, I see articles about the younger children. So maybe for the purpose of the discussion today, we can have children divided into broad age groups, Aruna. So what do you think would be your suggestion? How do we divide the age groups?
I would suggest that we look at infants below 2 years, and then we look at pre-primary or kindergarten children, that's roughly 2 to 5 years, young kids from 6 to 12 years, and then we can look at teenagers.
Okay. Listeners, teenagers do not even get fixated on the younger teenagers, but even the almost adult teenagers, where it gets more tougher sometimes. At least that's my experience. Currently, the device usage is high across all age groups because of the pandemic maybe. And is there any data, Aruna, on how much of continuous screen time and how many hours across each day is maximum permissible for the different age groups? I was just trying to look at this data so that there is some kind of a scientific basis or starting point for our discussion.
Sure. As you mentioned, Krishna, prior to the pandemic, the rules for engaging with technology were quite different. Mm-hmm. The American Pediatric Association actually recommended that kids below 2 years should not be exposed to screens at all. And kids from 2 to 5 years should cap their usage to not more than an hour a day. And for kids 6 and above, they had said that parents should set limits based on the types of media they use. And then COVID struck and screens began to dominate children's lives even more. So from online classes to extracurricular activities to even socializing, everything was being conducted on screen. So while we can't depend on the pre-COVID norms entirely, we can still use them as a rough guideline, especially during the holidays when probably formal online classes may reduce. So for kids below 2 years, as far as possible, keep them away from gadgets. A few video chats with grandparents may be okay if they are living far away, and that's the only way that you can interact in these times. And a little bit of screen time shared with parents, where the parent is watching with the child, is also okay. But avoid the so-called educational apps and DVDs, etc. Instead, give kids physical toys and books to self-soothe rather than, shoving an iPad or a phone. Give them toys or books for them to distract themselves with. And both the American Pediatric Association and the American Optometric Association recommend no screen time for below 1-year-olds. Okay, so I think that can still hold. And very minimal screen engagement for under 2s.
Okay.
So that will be for infants. For kids 2 to 5 years, technology time should be a shared activity as far as possible between parent and child.
Okay.
And the maximum limit can be capped to an hour apart from your online classes. Try to break it up into shorter chunks. This is both from a psychological and from an optometric point of view.
Okay.
And make sure that kids spend time in tech-free activities for the major part of the day. Technology should not be the dominant feature of their day.
So here can I interrupt? So you talked about psychological and optometric. Could you just convey it in terms of more layman terms as to how could be the adverse effect when we say psychological or optometric? What does it actually translate to?
Optometric is basically how it affects your eyesight and your vision. Okay. From the psychological viewpoint, this is a stage of major developmental changes and neurological changes that are happening in the brain. And this is a time where a lot of connections and rewiring is happening. So it can affect things like the child's ability to pay attention, their attention span, their need for constant reinforcement, the kind of stimulation they seek. So it can impact. So, for example, there are these, you read about these things, the kids nowadays, if they're given a magazine, they try to swipe it because they expect it to react like an iPad,
Yeah.
So that expectation is set up in the child. So then a book becomes a very passive medium for them if they're only exposed to these screens with these lot of stimulation and jumping characters all the time.
Okay. And a more specific question there. One is the use of these devices, but I would also like to ask about using it with the headphones or the earphones equivalent. Maybe you should touch upon that as well. First of all, they're on devices, plus they use, even when they are using some apps, etc. or games, they use the headphones. So maybe it is just not the eyes and the brain, maybe even to some extent their hearing.
Yeah, definitely. It could affect the hearing, especially if they're using low quality earphones. Some headphones are designed to be, that are good for the ears, that are. And it's again at the volume at which they hear it, So I think parents need to do a little bit of research in terms of finding out which is the best kind of headphone to invest in. And I think the normal, the free ones that you get with the devices, that's probably not the best thing to give children.
Okay. So we covered up to the age of 5. Now, when we move on to, say, younger kids, that's 6 to 12 years and teens, what is the recommendation? And here again, when I asked the recommendation, you were referring to the American standards. I presume maybe because there is not enough data on Indian...
there is not enough reliable data at least.
Okay, fine.
For kids 6 and above, instead of setting strict limits, it's better to monitor the type of media usage and the duration. For example, if a 7-year-old is watching YouTube for an hour and looking at an origami video and doing origami along with the video, then that's probably fine. But on the other hand, you don't want a kid of the same age watching cartoons on YouTube for 2 hours. So you have to, see whether the activity is actually engaging the child and actively involving the child. And here the American Optometric Association recommends that kids take a break of 10 minutes away from the screen for every hour of usage.
Okay.
And then parents can establish rules based on each individual household, the routine, the kind of activities everybody is engaged in. For example, no devices during meal times. And parents also have to follow this. If you set the rule, you need to follow it.
Right.
Or no switching on the TV when grandparents visit. And no phones allowed in the bedrooms in the evenings, so on and so forth. Again, you have to work out what works for you and your household.
Right.
And the rules have to be based on the child's developmental age, the activities they are doing, and your household routine.
Okay.
And it's a good idea to involve children also in coming up with the rules that you set for the household, because then the chances of their complying are greater.
True. So, and when it comes to teens, you leave it at that, or do you want to also talk about anything specific for that age group?
Yeah, for teens, obviously at this stage, they will start to want more privacy. We need to respect that, but we also need to ensure that they are safe.
Right.
So at this stage, instead of monitoring, the term mentoring may be more appropriate. One thing should be, which is non-negotiable, is that phone use should not interfere with sleep time.
Okay.
Because consequences of chronic lack of sleep are quite adverse. That should be something that parents are firm about. And you have to tell them about, no sharing inappropriate videos, photos, etc. And at this stage, they suggest that teens don't spend more than 10 minutes per day on each platform. Now, they're on a number of platforms.
Yeah.
So 10 minutes seems to be the ideal limit per day, per platform. So whether it's Facebook or Instagram or whatever various things they are on. A study that was conducted by UPenn found that kids who spend only 10 minutes or less, they actually show a decline in symptoms of depression, anxiety, loneliness, etc. compared to kids who are using it for longer durations.
So more than the overall time, we are talking about within specific app itself, how much time they use.
Specific apps, yeah.
Okay.
And you also have to see at this stage whether their overall development is shaping all right, whether they are developing connections with people, both online and offline, whether they are showing compassion towards others, and they have a passion for learning something, and they are responsible. So you also have to look and rather than just focusing on their devices alone, look at other aspects of development if they are proceeding all right.
Okay.
And for eyes, they recommend what is called the 20-20-20 rule. Is look away from, this applies even for adults, look away from the screen after every 20 minutes for 20 seconds to stare at an object that is at least 20 feet away. I mean, if you're in a room, you have to look out of the window perhaps to get a distance of 20 feet.
Okay. Yeah, so that is a good indication of the boundaries and the borders or what we should operate with. But I'm also wondering how to do that, especially as a parent for these age groups. Sometimes we think, yeah, it is okay, the child did just use it for a few minutes. The reality is, you cannot ask the child, okay, use it only for 10 minutes. When we use a device, we realize how incorrect it is. Till I started using an app to measure my usage, if somebody had asked me how long you spend on WhatsApp, I would have said maybe I check 5-6 times a day, and I unlock my phone hardly 10 times a day or something. But when I put an app to monitor this, I realized I'm using it for some 50 plus times a day. In the sense, I was unlocking 50 times. I could not believe my own data.
Yeah, but you're still below the average adult. Average adult, according to the data, checks their phone about 150 times a day.
Oh my God. I was referring here in terms of what we think we are doing versus what actually happens. So, the same thing if we extend to children, either for the parents to monitor the younger children, especially, or in the case of older children, if we were to say that, okay, you use an app only for 10 minutes, assuming the child agrees and there is an understanding of the rationale behind this. But how do you think this can be practically implemented? I'm not talking about it in the sense of putting a rule and enforcing it. No,
Yeah.
but practically to make it happen, we cannot be sitting and checking the time, or maybe that is what is required for younger children.
What I would suggest is instead of simply measuring the duration of media usage, which, as you said, runs into so many difficulties,
Right.
it is more important to ask yourself if your child is living a more or less balanced life. So ultimately, you need to look at the child's overall development physically, emotionally, cognitively, socially, and nowadays even digitally.
Hmm.
Is the child getting adequate exercise? Is the child getting a chance to spend some time outdoors? Is the child involved in any extracurricular activity that he or she enjoys? And now, because of COVID, that may be on screen, which is fine. Okay? Child getting adequate sleep. Is the child socializing with family and friends? Some online, some offline is okay. Is the child getting some unstructured free time? And if they using this time to be on devices, that's also fine. Okay? But and then is the child able to get off their devices without major tantrums or meltdowns?
Okay.
And is able to engage in other activities. So you have to see if the child is meeting developmental goals in various domains. Then you don't have to necessarily keep such tabs on the media usage alone.
Okay.
Because you're looking holistically at the overall development of the child, which is ultimately what we want. So this is actually a healthier way of monitoring their media usage because you're doing it indirectly.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. It makes it much more easier also. So
Yeah.
there I have a question. So do you think a mother would be better placed to objectively decide or judge the child in terms of, yes, there is overall development, there is this, or do you think it is also better to take somebody else's opinion? When I say somebody else's opinion, maybe the grandparent in the house or maybe somebody else who is interacting with us very closely, which is better?
See, I think it's a combination. You have to go with your gut instinct, and if you feel you have a doubt, or if you feel you don't really have a benchmark to which you could compare, is the child socializing adequately, then perhaps asking a grandparent or your the father of the child, talking to a friend, and also looking at the child's peers, because they give a very good reference point
Right.
as to what a typical child would look like, Yes, parents are not always the best judges of their own children, but it's what I'm asking parents to do is to look at development more holistically, look at it from the angle of cognition, social development, emotional development, physical development, and their digital usage. So that way you see that they have an adequate sleep, which is very, very important.
Right. So in the context of adequate sleep, the point that you earlier mentioned, especially for the teens and above, where they are looking at increased privacy, and therein you also mentioned about sleep time. So that balance, striking that balance is also slightly difficult in terms of, sharing inappropriate their photos, content. So do you think device usage behind closed doors is okay, or from your experience, how do you see it?
See, for younger children, they recommend generally that you should encourage children to use it in open spaces,
Okay.
on the dining table or somewhere where you can kind of keep an eye as to what's going on. For teenagers, that becomes increasingly hard because they want their privacy, and to some extent, yes, they should be given their privacy because that's also part of development.
Right.
To develop their own identity and construct their own individuality. So whether they're getting adequate sleep, one recommendation is that don't let them charge their devices in their rooms. And this, if you can apply this for your own self also by charging your phones in a common area.
Okay.
So then the phone is not in the bedroom late at night.
Okay.
So that's one way to keep a tab of the sleep times.
Okay.
At least it's not interrupted by media usage.
Okay. So that can be a generic rule in the house and everybody follows it. Yeah.
Need to follow it, I think, if you are imposing it on teenagers.
Right. I wanted to discuss that because I've heard parents talk about, I have put in some kind of child locks and this and that, all kinds of software. Hence, whatever they do, it is fine because I have put in all the measures. Because there are two kinds of parents. Parents who may be digitally aware of how to put all these apps and locks and whatever. And maybe there are parents who have no idea how to do any of this. So your tips in terms of the overall looking at the child's holistic development, actually, I'm liking it a lot. Yeah. So moving on, I wanted to touch upon another topic. I have also heard parents talk about why should we be worried about device usage in the sense that they feel, okay, when we were growing up, haven't we done things secretly? In the sense, maybe reading a book which we were not supposed to read or things like that, which in every house there would have been some no's and not to do. And we would have kind of violated that and secretly done something. So isn't device usage also like that? My own viewpoint, which I have shared with them, is maybe not, because reading a magazine, however bad that magazine is, etc., it cannot make you addictive. Whereas the content, online content, we realize that many of them have been designed to kind of pull children to that, and sometimes even adults. I wanted to know your views on how to perceive this. Do you think parents, it is okay to have that attitude, let the child do, let the child figure out, I as a parent need not bother about it? Do you think that kind of an approach should be considered?
I think, Krishna, you raised a very important point about how the internet is different from other types of media, like even a book, is because of its seductive pull. So these social platforms are designed to suck us in, and it's not just children who are at risk. Even we adults often fall for the thrall of the internet.
Right.
So the addictive pull of the internet can be fairly strong for even adults to overcome if we are not aware of its influence over us and how it can fragment our attention and even mess with our self-esteem, especially for teenagers. So it's important to talk to children about the pernicious effects of technology, not necessarily in a didactic or, like giving a lecture way, but also to help them become more self-aware. Even sharing with them how you struggle with getting off a device at certain times, or how you wasted half an hour surfing the net, and what you are doing to enforce discipline on your own self, can be one way in which you can lead this conversation, especially with teenagers. And you also have to let them know that there is inappropriate content out there on the internet. And no matter what filter or whatever built-in controls that parents may have put the locks, there's always a way for inappropriate content to bypass these filters. Okay, none of them are foolproof.
Right.
So the best protection actually is to tell your child that there is inappropriate content out there. And if they come across anything they feel is inappropriate, they need to come and tell you about it, and you reassure them that you will not scold them, not shout at them, but you will help them process what they have seen and put it in context. And they say that most internet users at some stage or the other will stumble upon inappropriate content. And in the majority of the cases, it does not cause any long-term harm. Okay.
Okay.
However, if the exposure is repeated and constant, and it is not discussed with a parent to help them give, a more balanced viewpoint, then it could lead to some worrisome issues.
Yeah.
I think you need to let them know the content is out there, it's inappropriate. But if they come across it or even, access it, they should come and tell you. You're not going to get upset with them.
Very well put. Yeah, that really helps. So we cannot protect them. We cannot create barriers, but just to make them aware and reassure them that you are always there to support them.
If they feel scared or threatened, see what parents say, we will take away your phone if we find you looking at these things again. Biggest threat to a child, because taking away their phone cuts them off from their entire peer group nowadays.
Right.
So that is not something you want to do, and then it builds up resentment, and then the communication between the parent and child becomes more adverse.
True. So I remember once when I was having a discussion with my teenage son, and when I said, without even you looking for it, inappropriate content will come to you, he said, how will that happen? Okay, he had just started using a device at that time. And one day when I was at home and I was searching for some text, and something in the search results, there was inappropriate content. So then I called him and I said, see, this is what I searched. Look at the search result, what has come as the first choice. Okay, it was some kind of a completely inappropriate, link, the whole with an eye-catchy title.
Right.
And I was telling him that, I am also tempted to go in and see. But it is just because my age is not yours, and I feel, okay, fine, that interest is not there. Because eye-catchy title, there is that thing there, but it is a bait. Please understand, it's a bait, and it is not about you, it is about your age. That is what they are targeting. So that really helped, that discussion. It opened up the discussion when I said that, see, I have not searched. I have searched for something very straightforward, and look at this result. And that is when he chose to believe that that inappropriate content may come without even him asking for it.
Exactly. Yes. That's a very nice example. Thank you.
Now, when we move on and when we say this kind of some engagement, this kind of interactions have happened in the house, when should the parent realize the child has become addicted or dependent on screens? You talked about the holistic development part, but at some point you may feel, it is little more than what is allowed, or you think it is some kind of a warning, but you are not sure whether the child has become addicted to it, or sometimes some other behaviors you don't even associate with the device, and maybe you feel, why is the behavior like that? You may think, you may attribute it to teenage, you may attribute it to growing up or something, they are not well, whatever it is. But when should an alarm ring inside the parent's head as to, no, there is something, maybe it is related to the device and I should seek help?
See, technology addiction mirrors symptoms of other addictions. So it again relates to what I had said earlier about looking at development holistically. So then look for signs such as the grades in school suddenly dropping. Are the kids not sleeping enough? Do they have trouble waking up in the morning? Are they socially awkward? Are you seeing sudden some changes in behavior that you cannot explain? And do they complain continuously when they can't access devices for whatever reason? And when you have them stop using technology, do they experience kind of withdrawal symptoms that they just can't handle it? Do you feel other parts of their life are getting jeopardized because they are always on screen time? And when you set limits for media usage, like no phones during dinner, etc., is there harsh resistance from them? So if you find that kids are exhibiting these behaviors, then you should try to set rules and limits. And if it's teenagers especially, try to do it collaboratively rather than in a conflict mode with them. And instead of asking kids to get offline immediately when they are doing something on a device, you tell them to finish what they are doing and then get offline, and have them transition into an activity that they enjoy that is not tech related. And studies also show that kids who are engaged in sports are less likely to get addicted to especially video games. And in general, kids who are busy and otherwise engaged are less likely to show signs of risky online behavior. So
Okay.
basically, it is again, like I said, about maintaining a balance between school, extracurricular activities, social time, exercise, outdoor time, free time, and time spent in the digital world.
Excellent. Because I feel this is such a different kind of a suggestion from what, as parents, when we have these discussions, our children's that peer group parents, when we meet, we end up discussing techniques which I find very many times ridiculous. I'm also party to such discussions. When the child is in maybe the 6th standard, 7th standard equivalent, the early teens, then many of us, we talk about, I have created an email ID and I make sure that I also know the password. Or when the child has opened a social media account, I request the child to friend me also, or friend me, connect me, whatever it is, depending on the platform. Somehow I feel those are not correct. Or
Yeah, because kids are always smarter than us when it comes to technology.
yes.
So a lot of them may have two Facebook accounts, one that they share and another that is actually their real Facebook account. So I'm sure they're much smarter in gaming the system than parents. Even in terms of, if some parents say they look at the history, that the viewing history, is that you can also clear that, and so that the parent cannot find out.
Right.
And kids are always one up against us if we try to track them like this. So the more competitive we get, I think the likelihood of their doing it on the sly increases, which is something we don't want to kind of encourage.
Yes.
So I think it's better to just look at them, all aspects of development, rather than just focusing on technology.
Right. And some of the mistakes typically made by parents is most often an old phone is given to the child. And they refer to this, okay, my child is not, they do not know all this. It's just a dabba phone that I have given. But actually it may be an old smartphone, and many times you don't need to give a child a smartphone. I'm talking about when the child starts going outside, not in the pandemic context. When you need to give a phone for safety reasons, you need to pick up and for such logistic reasons. And another thing is, most often, again in pre-pandemic, and I hope we will come to that scenario soon, at least in a few years, where children come and tell parents that I need to use the internet because I need to do homework, which I feel is the number one incorrect excuse, and maybe it helps the parents to actually find out from the teachers or from other parents whether such homework is actually given. It may not be. What do you think? What kinds of manipulations happen in this area?
I think it all depends on having an open communication with your child. Not the technology that's the problem per se, but it's in the relationship that has developed between the parent and the child. It's only in this context of technology. The parent who's having trouble in this area is likely to have trouble in other aspects as well. It is more important that you try to smoothen the relationship to see how you can gain more trust between parent and child, that is bi-directional, that they trust you more and you trust them more. Because it's not a question of, who is smarter than whom, because, you don't want to play that game, especially with your child.
Right.
If it has gone to this level where you feel that there is, there's subterfuge and that they are lying, then there's something fundamental in the relationship that needs to change. It's not just about technology then.
Right. And suppose there are these rules, okay, to get arrived at together in the house, etc., depending on the age group. And let's assume for a moment there is gross violation happening. And when it comes to older children, maybe in terms of wantingly accessing inappropriate content or sharing inappropriate content, things like that happening, and the parent discovers this, What do you think should be the approach? Because I remember you saying it should not be about confiscating the device, etc. earlier. Could you just elaborate a bit more on that?
If that is happening, I think there are probably issues in other aspects of the child's life as well, including the child's emotional and social development. If the child is sharing inappropriate videos and photos and indulging in various kinds of risky behavior online, in such a situation, it's kind of, again, it's like resetting the parent-child relationship, and you have to go back to the fundamentals of establishing trust, openness with one another. And so this would involve, it's not just, I don't think just taking away the phone is the solution, but probably even seeing a counselor on how to improve the communication between the parent and child, because this is something more fundamental and basic than just the technology that's around. Even without technology, there's likely to be animosity between the parent and child if it has reached this level.
Yeah. So in this case, the use of technology or the inappropriate use of technology is just a symptom or a trigger.
It's just one more medium through which they express that resentment and hatred.
Correct. Yeah. We've been discussing the children a lot. What do you think? What is the influence of the parent or adult's own usage of devices in terms of using devices in a positive manner? If that, that kind of a term is feasible.
Kids are more tech savvy than most parents nowadays. But you also need to monitor your own tech cues. For example, when your children come and talk to you, are you actually present with them? Are you making eye contact and actually listening to them? Or are you, one eye is on the phone and you are actually messaging? That happens very often. Then do you have tech-free times in the house? Like strictly no phones during meals, no taking work calls also. When you go on family vacations, sometimes it's, the family is not interacting at all. Everybody is on a different device.
Right.
So are you also always on, work-related calls, or can you shut that out for certain periods as well? That you need to ask yourself that question. And do you listen with full attention when they talk to you? And or do they get frustrated and go out because every time they come to tell you something, you say, 1 minute, my boss is phoning, or I have to take this call, or I just have this email to answer. So, and also you have to model responsible usage, like not texting or talking while driving, for example. Avoid oversharing on social media. And as I told you earlier, on average, a study found that adults check their phones around 150 times per day. So be very mindful of your own usage. And are you giving yourself a 15-minute break after every hour of, usage, even if you're working? So I think these are some things that, parents, we can also model instead of just imposing limits on the children, because I think this is a more powerful example to actually show how you are, controlling your own usage of devices.
Right. Indirect importance that we give to the phone when any occasion or not an occasion we use it for taking photos, sharing with people, etc. How the children interpret it could be very different, right?
And also, see, it's not just about not using technology. It's also about using technology positively, even to engage with your child. Right. So it's also good at times to play video games with them, use some common apps, send each other, messages through WhatsApp, and actually be connected to each other digitally. Not in a spying, stealthy kind of mode, but be connected to your child.
Okay. Now, when you talked about using apps together, playing together, using the device itself, are there any suggestions? Some examples could we give of positive use? Because after all, it's a tool, right? And how we use a tool, we can use a knife for good purpose as well as for a bad purpose. Similarly, this is also a tool that can be used for good. So we have focused a lot on how to avoid the negative impact, etc., or how to stay away from it. Now, if we were to reiterate the positive aspects of seeing the device as a tool and how to inculcate good habits around using this as a tool. So you were suggesting these common apps. Could you give a little more examples around the positive uses?
It depends on your child's interests and your interests, okay? So for example, something as simple, if you want to teach your child breathing exercises, okay, like a form of pranayama or something, there are wonderful apps that you get. That you download, and it's just short duration, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You can choose whatever duration you want, where you can do it together, and they are quite fun.
Okay.
In fact, there is one app I use with my daughter when she goes to sleep. It's a breathing app. Likewise, there are apps that promote self-expression. So it's writing or creating a video or making a painting. So there are so many ways with which they can engage with technology.
Correct.
In a positive way.
Yeah. Here I also remember about this audiobooks. This concept of audiobooks itself is so interesting, to listen to books together along with the child, especially for younger children, etc. And sometimes children may not show interest in reading, and using audiobooks could be a good way of listening to books together with the child, right?
Yeah, audiobooks is a wonderful activity. So yes, definitely make use of these kind of apps. And there is a website called Common Sense Media.
Yes.
That parents can access. They rate apps and various websites, and they recommend shows that children can watch for different age groups. And they give data that's quite reliable and well researched and dependable.
Yes, I have used that a lot for movies actually.
Yeah.
Because you search for a movie in Common Sense Media and it tells you what is the age group and why they consider, they give a rating with respect to violence, with respect to use of language, with respect to, A, B, C, D, so many other criteria. And it's very interesting to examine that. And I remember initially I used to do that, and later on, my children started looking at Common Sense Media and they'd say, oh, see, look at this. This is how Common Sense Media's rating is for this movie. Now can we watch it together?
Okay.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example. Yeah. So good, Aruna. I think I have covered the questions that I had in my mind. Is there anything else that you feel we left out and we should add? Because I remember you talking about like cyberbullying and social media is extremely relevant in the context of device usage, but I really feel we should have a separate episode because that particular topic itself is so vast. But maybe you should just give an introduction of this topic if people are not aware.
Just as bullying is a problem in schools across the world, cyberbullying also happens nowadays with greater frequency, unfortunately. And cyberbullying happens when a kid is repeatedly and willfully harmed online. And what makes this bullying dangerous is that the victim is targeted again and again. If it's a one-time instance, it's not considered cyberbullying. And roughly around 20 to 40% of kids are harassed or bullied online. And again, this is interesting. It's usually not a stranger, but someone the child knows typically does the bullying. And most victims tend to be between the teenagers, between the ages of 13 to 18.
Okay.
And those who use social media more, and especially use it a lot, tend to be victimized or bullied more.
Okay.
And teens who tend to have conflicts with their parents also tend to develop relationships with strangers online. So that is something that it's best addressed by having a more harmonious relationship with the child. That's the best protection actually.
Yeah.
And many teens, are scared to report problems to parents because they're scared that the phone will be taken away. And they don't want that connection to be snatched away. So, but you need to reassure a child that they should come and tell you if either they or somebody they know is being bullied online.
Right. Maybe in terms of summarizing, the key takeaway for me across the various practical tips that you shared is for the parent to see the device as not something which is a disturbance or which is a tool where the parent has power, but the potential of using that as a tool, just like you guide the child through use of many other things, there is a potential to use the device also and inculcate good habits around, because ultimately they are going to use these devices.
Absolutely. Devices are not something that children should be taught to be feared or something that they need to do surreptitiously.
Right.
Because we're living in an increasingly digitalized world. There are so many positives, and so we need children to harness those positives without falling prey to the negative aspects. And talking to them about that is the best way to protect them.
Yeah. And also setting a good example, the parents' own usage of the device, good habits around the device.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Aruna. Thank you for your time and for patiently answering a lot of these questions. Look forward to your book, and I'm sure the parents and the listeners of this episode would be interested. You want to talk about the book? The title itself is very interesting, but if you would like to talk a bit more.
Yeah, thank you so much, Krishna, for giving me this opportunity. It has been a real pleasure talking to you. The book is meant for young adults from age 18 to up to 35, basically targeting individuals in their 20s. And to write this book, I interviewed many individuals in this age group and spoke to them about their concerns, their hopes, their fears, their worries, their daily habits, their media usage, etc. And then I put together a series of chapters based on these interviews, and then, did a lot of research in terms of the psychological and sociological literature in terms of to provide concrete tips for individuals in this age group on how to navigate the many changes that take place in the person's 20s, because 20s is the age where a lot of changes happen, dramatic changes. Most kids, move out of home, get a job, get into relationships.
Sudden independence.
Yes, sudden independence. So it's a lot of issues to deal with.
Okay.
So really wonderful talking to you.
Same here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Do visit my website, thenewindianwoman.com, for related blogs on this topic. Of course, I would love to hear from you. You could rate or leave a comment in your podcast app or write to me at krishna@thenewindianwoman.com. Remember, you are what you want to be, and the time starts now.